This conference will now be recorded.
Now it's working. Lisa, do you want all the lights on? Okay, we'll leave all the lights on. Okay, great. All right, thank you everyone for coming. And so today we're going to move on to self-efficacy. But to remind us what we did last week, I want to ask you what you did last week to increase your hope. And remember, that was enhancing the pathways and the agency. Anything you want to share from last week that worked? And I'm watching the online comments too. Yeah,
So
Katie.
what I had written down was actually that I like my journey towards my dissertation, and it was actually really strange because as soon as I left this class, I started thinking about what faculty I wanted to work with. So I thought that maybe that was my first step, and creating a pathway would be to find what faculty I want to work with, or which faculty is studying something that maybe I'm interested in. And it's actually really strange because after that, I found out who I was working with, and then I figured it out, and then starting.
Great. So that's a great example. So you started to think about the sub-steps, and the first step is who's going to be your faculty chair. Great. Anybody else? Yeah.
So I started getting really overwhelmed with all of my projects and coursework for the semester. And so I had a plan to my goal was to just get through the semester and finish all my projects. And the first step was to write out all my projects and all the components for each project. And it was overwhelming to look at, but now I broke it down into priority deadline and stuff.
Okay, great. And Paul says online, according to the same line, thinking this bigger goal and breaking it into smaller steps, right? And it was what you said just kind of reminded me of what we'll talk about today, which is you didn't just say, okay, I'm going to do my best, which we'll find out today is the worst, right? So actually taking more concrete action. So great. Thank you guys for sharing. Okay, so today, the second component of PsyCap, which is self-efficacy, and we'll talk about what it is, and we'll talk about SMART goals, and then we'll talk about SMART plus goals. So just reviewing, last week we talked about pathways, agency, and goals. Okay, and you're all psychologists, so you probably know this, but self-esteem is how you feel about yourself, or I feel good or bad about myself, and self-efficacy is your belief in your ability to get something done. And there is a general sense of self-efficacy, and there's a very specific sense. So you have a self-efficacy for work, a self-efficacy for school. Okay, and it's what a person believes they can do with their skills under certain conditions. And it involves self-esteem, motivation, self-respect, locus of control. And what we do know from the research is that decreased self-efficacy is not a good thing. It's correlated with depression and anxiety, and increased self-efficacy is correlated with good things, achieving goals, well-being, and problem solving. People with high self-efficacy see difficult tasks as interesting challenges to be mastered instead of impossible, scary threats to be avoided. And this has been really helpful for me when I'm feeling scared and I'm feeling that something's very overwhelming, to recognize that I'm not using my self-efficacy, right? If I'm feeling that way, then I'm not using it. They also bounce back from failure with resilience and a healthy perspective. And we'll talk about resilience next week. Okay, so ways to boost self-efficacy. We're going to work on these today. So having a role model, having a cheerleader, which is an active constructive responder, managing stress appropriately, having mastery experiences, knowing your strengths, and savoring your wins. Does anybody know what an active constructive responder is? There's a great book on relationships, and it talks about that there's 4 main styles, An active constructive responder is the best, and that is when you share good news with me, I respond that I'm genuinely joyful for you and happy for you. And that's an active constructive responder. The other three styles are acting, oh, that's great, you had something great happen to you, listen to what great happened to me. Another way is to just kind of dismiss it. Oh, that's great, honey, thanks for sharing. And another way is to actively go after it, attack it, right? Which is obviously not good. So that genuine joy that someone feels when you achieve something and when something good happens to you is an active constructive responder. And having the permission to own your own worth. So a lot of what self-efficacy is kind of reflecting back on your past successes and using that to boost you forward. Okay, so the first practice that we're going to do is that you're going to practice adding some of the self-efficacy to the goal that you had from last week. So we're going to kind of continue on working with that same academic goal that you have and kind of beginning to sketch out who is your role model, or some people found out I don't have a role model. Okay, all right, so then your first step is who is it, which kind of reminds me of your topic with the, finding the chair. Who's your cheerleader or cheerleaders? How do you recognize stress around this issue and how do you regulate that? Right, and so that can come from the first 3 weeks where we talked about positive emotions and gratitude and breathing and mindfulness that can help you regulate that stress. Fourth, what mastery experiences have you had? What is similar to your goal now that you've achieved in the past? And then fifth, what are your strengths? Now, next semester, I'm going to do a second training just like this, solely on character strengths. And so I'll teach that at a later time. If you haven't done this, though, the Via Character is an online website and it's a test for free, and you can find out what your top 5 strengths are. And so what I like to do is think about when I'm hit a roadblock or I'm having a difficult time, which one of my 5 strengths can I pull on? So for example, one of mine is love of learning. Another one is fairness. And another one is judgment. So, how can I use one of these things? And then there's also the Clifton Strengths Finder, which is a different one, and you pay for that one. And, if you've ever done that one, that one's equally as good too to use. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give you several minutes to write down what your response is to these 5 things. And if you don't know your strengths right now, just think about what is something that you feel that you're really good at and how can you bring that forward to this goal. I'll give you guys a few minutes and I'm going to see what the chat box is doing online.
Have you? Okay, if you haven't taken it, don't worry. You could just go off of what you believe your top strength is. And then whenever you schedule the next go in there, I see, and get a record of it.
Thanks, Jeff.
All right, thanks, Susan. Okay, and for those of you online, you too should just relate back to your goal from last week and how you can, how these 5 things relate to your goal. Okay, so when I open up the discussion and ask, of these 5 things, which one was the hardest to do? Your strengths? Okay, you may not know that yet, right? That's a really powerful tool to use. Okay, and then maybe sharing one that you feel confident about. So Elaine says the role model was tough for her. Or maybe that was confident, I'm not sure. But okay, and the model was not easy. That was mentioned in the last class. A lot of people said, like, I haven't found my role model yet. Yeah.
Or sharing the one we feel confident in.
Yes.
So my goal is to get the internship practicum site, like my top choice or one of my top choices.
Mm-hmm.
And for the mastery experiences, I did that when I was an undergrad. So it's like I know I've been through 4 rounds of interviews and deciding which one I want and which fits best.
So yeah, I kind of feel like you've done this before, and maybe even reflecting on what was it that made it successful before, right? And that might clue you in as to something, like it might have been support from a professor, it might have been somebody helped you with applications, like you might think what was it that made it successful to help you replicate it again. Okay. Okay, so continuing to think about goals, right? And what I want to just quickly review is that a lot of goals are not met. And so classically, we think about New Year's resolutions and how well they're kept. That's a goal, right? And they're very rarely kept. And so what we find why that is that the goal is poorly defined. There was poor preparation or planning. There was a lack of vision and mapping, a lack of accountability, intrinsic motivation, a lack of willpower, quote unquote, because actually what we're going to discover is willpower isn't what helps you achieve your goal. And lack of primers or visual cues or rituals to reinforce the goal. And also failure to plan to fail. And Elaine says lack of courage. That's true. Okay, so a lot of you have probably heard of SMART goals. So I'll quickly review that and then we'll move to the SMART Plus goals. But this basically means that they're specific, measurable, and you can either say agreed upon, you've got an agreement from everybody if you're corporate or you need group buy-in, or attainable if it's just an individual, realistic, and timely. And for the goal to be specific, it needs to answer the questions, what, why, and how. And I always actually talk about this when people do resumes, that each bullet point also needs to address that point and why you've done it better than somebody else. So what will be done, why it needs to be accomplished, and how will it be executed and by when. So vague goal is increase sales. Specific goal is increase sales by 15% by the end of the quarter by placing 300 customer calls. So you can see you're trying for the same thing in both goals, but one is much more likely to be achieved, and it has nothing to do with anything but other than the goal is very specific and measurable. Okay, do your best goals are the worst. So whenever you say I'm going to do my best, it's worse than if you have any sort of plan, right? So do your best is sort of get out of jail free card that you give to yourself. Okay, and what can you use to get specific? You can use mind maps, and you can also use learner questions to sort of generate what is it, get more specificity around your goal. Okay, we talk about feeding your elephant. So remember that your primal brain, your monkey brain, likes small, easy steps, right? So again, kind of going back to hope, breaking it into small steps, just remember whatever you're doing, make it small and easy with preferably immediate positive feedback, right? You know you've done it. And then, or this short reward or a small reward we're going to talk about. Okay, so measurements are necessary to know if the goal is accomplished. Short-term measures that are incorporated into greater goals are most effective so you can track your progress. So it's not just about measuring the end, but measuring as you're going along. Okay, an unmeasurable goal, I'm going to become more positive. A measurable goal, I will focus on building positive emotions by tracking my positivity ratio weekly over the course of a month. And if any of you are interested in doing this, if you go back to the PowerPoint where we did loving kindness meditation, that positivity resonance website has the tool, and you can actually track yourself in your positivity. You can also create your own measurement on a scale of 1 to 10. How hopeful are you? One item overall global measurement is valid. And then you can follow up. You've got your pre and your post on a scale of 1 to 10. How hopeful are you? Okay, so the other thing is you need to make this goal realistic. And here we're talking about moving the smaller pieces and maybe the overall goal to something that's realistic for you. And this is a great chart on where you want to be. You want to be in the upper right quadrant, arousal, flow, and control. And if the goal's too easy, you can fall into apathy and boredom. And if the goal's too much or overwhelming, you go over to anxiety and worry, and you don't want to be there either. So if you're feeling the anxiety and worry, remember again, somehow you're not breaking it down small enough to put yourself into the arousal and flow condition. You're feeling aroused, you're doing it, and you're feeling good about it. Okay, and so Amelia, who made this slide, talks about doing 5 push-ups a day and increase by 1 push-up a week for a month, right? Very small, very easy goal, but she's continuing to get harder and will build her strength. Okay, so it needs to be time-bound, having an endpoint, so not just making it vague into the future, because then it's easy to forget about. It's very specific when you're like, I'm going to do this by the end of the semester. And if your time frame of the goal exceeds 1 month, create micro goals that support that larger goal, right? So it's hard for your mind to really focus on a vague long-term goal, and so breaking it up into small steps. And I'm sure you've done things like this, like I'm going to have my applications out by this point. I'm going to have interviews scheduled by this point, to get to where you're going. Okay, and then I have this handout. Those of you online can just take it from the PowerPoint. It's just simply a print of this slide where you can get more specific with your goal. So you can use that if you find that it's helpful, or you can write down, just next to these specific things, how can you make your goal more specific, more measurable, make sure that it's attainable and realistic and timely, which is broken into small steps and a due date. So again, I'm going to give you a few minutes just to write down how you can use these tools to improve your goals. Okay, so bringing it back in for discussion, anyone want to share examples of how you plan to measure progress and completion of a goal? Any light bulbs? Okay, so Mary Munline says, I think you can use broad and build, and she's going to read 2 articles a week, or no, this is now, to complete a summary page. Let's see. For each, have a summary page for each to have remaining articles for dissertation completed. That's great. That's what I did for my dissertation. Okay, so Miriam says she's going to use the broaden and build theory and add joyful activity per week so I can increase my hope and motivation and lessen the boredom of doing repeated long work. Right, anybody here? Any examples of how you plan to measure progress? Okay, any examples of how you're able to make your goal more time-bound? To set some specific due dates for yourself or breaking into smaller steps?
So I use this action plan to be a part of the greater goal that I have set last week. So this is basically like a micro goal of like one of the to-do things that I have inside of my goal. So that's how I.
Okay, so you're focusing on a micro goal right now. Okay, great. Did you add any were you able to add any due dates?
Yeah, I have like time specific due dates.
Okay, great. And Paul mentioned online he added some milestones. Okay, great. All right, so now we're going to get to the newest, most cutting edge research around goal setting. I feel like SMART goals have been around forever, but this is something that I have found really valuable myself, and that is using approach goals, using primers, commitment, implementation intentions, accountability, and rewards and celebrations. So first, approach versus avoidance goals. One of the things to really understand is that your brain does not hear the not or the negative. So if you would like to quit something like a bad habit, thinking in your mind, I don't want to do that anymore, just helps you think about that thing more, right? So the right hemisphere of your brain can't understand the word not. So it's just like you're setting yourself up for failure in that way. So what you want to do is change it to be an approach goal, right? You're framing it in a positive. You're moving towards something. And avoiding something takes more mental and physical energy than approaching it. So when you set a goal, so for example, this is a classic one. I want to lose weight, right? That's framed negatively, right? So maybe think about what the steps are you think that will get you there, and your approach goal is, I want to do these things. Like I want to go to the gym 3 times a week. I want to, again, even with calories, you know, with the counting and the negative, it's more of an approach goal to say, I want to eat 5 servings of vegetables and 3 servings of fruit a day. So what that will do is crowd out the negative stuff, but if you're focusing on the positive stuff, it's easier to do. And your brain understands it more. And that's another big reason why we fail, is because when we're trying not to do something, we're repeating that in our brain and setting ourselves up. Okay, so the next thing is called priming. And what we know, and I had a ton of research on this that I did not share with you because we don't have time, but I just want to sum it up to say, very silly, simple things make a difference in how you think. Literally putting an image of a runner crossing the finish line, breaking the tape on a training manual caused people to significantly outperform the people who didn't have that victorious image on their training manual. The other thing is just using, hearing a story about somebody being rude will cause you to be rude in your next interaction. So the things that you hear and say set up your behavior. And so one of the things that we are starting to find out is as much as 80% of our day's activity is directed by unthinking reaction to cues, right? So when we see a cue, when we see something, we do it. Like, you know, I see something and I want chocolate. I see something else and I want coffee. These are all cue-driven behaviors. And so if you can understand that setting up different cues for yourself can change the way you think about it. So it's like you're in a kind of a neural rut in the way you think. So many experiments have demonstrated the effect of primers by using unconscious stimuli and measuring their impact. There was one on sales and, just using a few primers and they outsold like 300%. So very, very powerful research. And think about marketing and advertising. They know this stuff and they're using it on us, right? So we can use it on ourselves to help achieve our goals. And one of the things when I took this course, Amelia gave us this little red, it looks like a little red wooden bird, and it had 2 blank spots. It was painted really nicely, really bright, and 2 white spots for an eye, and you have a sticker, and you put one sticker on the eye, and the other eye is left blank, and the bird is looking at you to remind you that the other eye, your goal, is not finished yet. And so you set it somewhere in your house where it's always looking at you, like it's always watching you. Which I thought was really interesting. But again, just if you walk in your house, it's a visual cue that there's something to be done. I did something somewhat similar when I took Barbara Fredrickson's class. I did like a gratitude shrine. So in my office, I have little knickknacks and things that from people who have been role models or have meant a lot to me, or important things, I've put them all there. So when I walk in my office and I see that, it just automatically generates that gratitude. So you can think about, it's another way to use a cue. Okay, examples of conscious and unconscious primers, Post-it signs, even a password that you type in every day, a license plate, charm bracelets, ringtones, phone alarms. I use phone alarms to go to bed. So I have one that rings when it's time for me to go upstairs, and it's another one it's time for lights out, and so that always keeps me on track. Vision boards, colleagues, computer wallpapers, screensavers. I think you can just about turn anything into a primer. But thinking about how you're setting up your mental world to be constantly primed to achieve your goal. And I think in a way that doesn't bring stress. Like sometimes I think that bird could be stressful. Yeah, it's looking at me. But or it could be really motivating, Okay, so the third thing to do is to commit to your goal. And this sounds almost not necessary, but you want to increase the value by helping people identify personal importance of the goal. But more than that, you want to write a contract. So writing a contract to yourself about how you're going to achieve this goal will increase your ability to meet it. So the research shows that it can increase the probability by 86%, which is huge. Okay, and TJ says that she uses Post-it notes as visual primers. Okay, also any activity that seals your commitment, a public Facebook post, like I'm going to do a triathlon or whatever, and you put that out there, then that's hard to take back, right? So you could use that, not all the time, but sometimes it would be appropriate. There you go. So the next thing is setting your intention and preventing pitfalls. So the main thing you're going to do is when situation X arises, I will perform response Y. So when you think about your goal and you think about where you've come short before, what are you going to do when that comes up again? So, you know, when I need to be reading journal articles, but I'd rather be on Facebook and that's calling my name, what am I going to do, right? And so part of it is you are removing ambiguity, and you're stating in the future how you're going to behave. So you're also cutting down on your mental load, right? So every time this event comes up, you don't have to go, oh, am I going to do this or am I going to do that? Which is draining your ego, you know, depleting your ego and your ability to make good choices. But instead of you're like, I know I'm going to do this thing, then it's like it's an automatic. So again, kind of getting our behavior more automatic. Research shows that using implementation intentions triple the chances of a goal success. It's particularly good for hard goals. It removes ambivalence and it reframes a negative experience into a positive one. So instead of this temptation or obstacle coming to, you know, at you and you're having this moment, you're reframing it into, I'm taking charge and this is what I'm going to do. Okay. So goal accountability. This is telling somebody else about your goal, basically, and asking them to hold you accountable, right? So if you're saying, I'll just take one of the examples from online, I'm going to read 2 journal articles a day and write a summary for each, right? So, and maybe that's 5 days of the week and that's 10 of them. He's got somebody that he is accountable to at the end of the week that he's answering, I did this or I didn't do this, right? And this is also something that's really powerful in coaching, and why I pay money for a coach is to have somebody accountable. So when I say these are my goals and this is what I'm going to do, my coach Beth will say to me, you know, how can I keep you accountable? And I'll say, well, I'm going to show you my sheet where I check off what I do every day, or whatever it is, and you know, for one particular goal. How I'm going to show her. And then when I'm thinking about it and I'm not doing those things, I'm thinking, oh, I got to show this to Beth, right? And so this goal accountability can again add another layer. Okay, put simply, someone other than you that knows and cares, you tell them that you're going to accomplish this. Okay, so you tell them what you will do, when you will do it by, and how will I know you've been successful? Right? And so that's also a question you can ask of clients as well. Another one that Beth says to me is, what can you start doing today to go after this goal? Okay. So we have a study with 2 groups, and group 1 had to report their decision, which is, you know, mimicking accountability. And group 2 said they would not have to justify their decisions to anyone. And this was a difficult decision-making task requiring a lot of information processing. Those in the accountability group scored 243% higher. So higher performance by being accountable. So the last thing is to celebrate small wins, right? And this is where we go back to, we're saying feed your elephant brain or feed your monkey brain. Humans are biologically wired to react well to rewards. And so you want to create rituals that celebrate the completion of small tasks leading to the completions of larger goals. So in this one I am really bad at. I always wait to the big thing to do a celebration rather than little things. throughout the day, throughout the week, that are positive reinforcement for doing activities toward that goal. And again, I think when used appropriately, it can also increase your positive emotions. You know, if you're using it wisely, it can kind of keep you on that upward spiral. The celebration does not need to be big or lofty or costly. Okay. So the next activity is just to go back to your goals again, and how are you going to make it an approach goal, include primers, increase commitment, writing a contract to yourself, set intentions to plan for obstacles, failure, and or find someone to hold yourself accountable, and how are you going to celebrate small wins. So just writing down how you're going to do these things. I was like, oh, TJ just came on in. So she's been there. Okay. And I think I took her out of Canvas. I think that's what I did. So I need to add her back into Canvas. Yeah. That's what it was. It wasn't the email list. Hmm? Oh, yeah, you're right. Okay, we're out of time, so I'll give you guys one more minute. Okay, does anyone have any good examples of how they plan to use primers? Okay, Elaine says for obstacles and failures, she intends to use gratitude and appreciation for the times that have gone well, and blessings for all the gifts. Yeah, Katie.
So for primers, what I like have a calendar that's next to my bed, and then I keep a calendar on my desk, and then I have my planner. So maybe for primers, just like setting dates on the calendars and the planner, just so every time I look at it, it's always.
So that, yeah, putting that date in your calendar can be a primer, right? Anyone have a good example of how you set intentions for implementation? So again, when X happens, I'm going to do, you know, when this thing comes up, I'm going to do something, kind of setting your, knowing what you're going to do. Mine is to do the 5 breaths in and the 5 breaths out, right? Just to kind of connect back in. So for a roadblock for a particular goal. When this happens, I'm gonna do my breathing. Anyone else? Okay. All right, so I know there's an issue with the Canvas discussion. I've put it up and I'm contacting IT to find out why some people haven't been able to access it because it looks accessible on my end. But I'll put up another discussion board for what you want to do this week to increase your self-efficacy. So sort of looking back over this and finding, you know, what's one thing you can do this week to increase your self-efficacy. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay, bye everyone online.